The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Let's start with George F. Will knocking Mike Huckabee and Newt Gingrich right off the presidential stage. David Corns, the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst, and Eric Boehlert is with Media Matters. Eric, I want to start with you about this commentary on Sunday. But first of all, here's Huckabee, Mike Huckabee, the former governor, Saturday night on his Fox TV show. Let's watch.
Thank you very much. And welcome to Huckabee from the Fox News studios in New York City. My book, A Simple Government, is causing quite the stir this week. And some of it is, quite frankly, from my own verbal gaffe. In a radio interview with Steve Malzberg on Monday, I said President Obama spent part of his early life in Kenya. I meant to say Indonesia. His father and grandfather were from Kenya. My verbal slip did not go unnoticed.
Well, of course, he didn't say part of his youth. Here's what Huckabee actually said, and he refused to replay this tape. Obviously, he was embarrassed by it. Here's what he said with radio talk show host Steve Malzberg last Monday, and it was no accident. Let's listen.
His perspective as growing up in Kenya with a Kenyan father and grandfather, their view of the Mau Mau revolution in Kenya is very different than ours because he probably grew up hearing that the British were a bunch of imperialists who persecuted his grandfather.
You know, it's very, very hard, Eric, to find any truth in that statement. He didn't grow up with his father, didn't ever meet his grandfather, met his father, I think, once. Right. Never was and I spent years in Africa, and going back 20 times, I think I've been there about 500 days more than this guy, or maybe 700 days or whatever. The idea he's somehow a Kenyan, because that's where his parents lived, or his father lived, is unbelievably inaccurate to the point where you cannot believe it was a slip of the tongue.
No, there is no slip of the tongue, but it's funny. Mike Huckabee went back to that hole over the weekend on his Fox News show. He had to address it, so he decided, it was a slip of the tongue. As we've talked about, the Kenya gaffe, as he calls it, is absolutely central to this right-wing critique of Obama, that he's foreign, he's not like us. He was influenced by his radical father and his radical grandfather. Obama wrote an entire book about how he didn't know his father, and so Mike Huckabee plays up this notion that Obama had an anti-American sentiment growing up that he inherited from his father and grandfather. None of this stuff is true. And Huckabee, it's interesting, Huckabee never ventured out of the right-wing bubble last week, and look what it got him. You know, he stayed on right-wing radio, he stayed on Fox News, and he kept digging a hole deeper and deeper. He refused to sit down with any, real journalist or independent reporter and take any serious questions on this. You know, the right, they think they've created this parallel universe where they don't have to deal with reality or the facts. But as Huckabee found out last week, it's a good idea to at least try. But again, he just kept digging and digging, and he stuck with this. It's a gaffe. It's not a gaffe.
Do you think if his father was from England, for example, or another European country like Germany, they'd be ranting on this? Would they be talking about this father thing?
No, of course not. That's the whole angle. That's the whole shtick. He's not like us. If he was Canadian, who would care? It's Africa. It's very dangerous and disturbing. So this is what
it's Mau Mau.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Mau Mau.
Look,
it's not Africa. It's black guys going around killing white guys. I mean, it's Nat Turner stuff. This is no fluke. This is no gaffe. Right. He didn't accidentally fall. I agree with you,
Chris,
Eric.
It's also important to remember the context of the conversation. Although we've never really heard of this host before, what he was saying to Huckabee was Obama despises the West, he despises England, and he despises Israel. He's like the trifecta.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to get into this at the end of the show. Not only does he builds up this specter that the guy is an imposter. Yeah. You don't have any medical records on the guy. Have no educational records.
We don't know where he went to college.
He could be somebody that doesn't exist. He could be a fictitious character.
He could be a man.
What are they talking about?
Yeah, but that's the whole.
George Will said in his column that is pure paranoia, and Huckabee should have said so from the day
that was the context of this. So while he's talking about despising the West, Huckabee is coming up with an explanation. His explanation is this whole Mau Mau stuff and his father and his grandfather. And he never once said, listen, I disagree with this guy on policy, but he does not hate America. He's not any different than you and I. And so he just is pandering to Planet Fox. That's really what this is.
No, it's also far-right, culturally conservative. Here he is, Huckabee, Saturday night, more on Fox, to his unique universe. Here it is. Let's listen.
By the way, I'm going to be back on the road this week, signing copies of A Simple Government and probably stirring up even more trouble. Also at MikeHuckabee.com, you'll find links to get a copy of the book Simple Government. You can get it at Amazon, retailers, and the link at MikeHuckabee.com to get an autographed copy.
You know, he's very cuddly about himself, Eric, the way he describes himself as some sort of troubadour of gaffes, as if he isn't out there playing to the haters. There's no doubt in my mind, I've watched this guy, his comments about the Palestinians, his comments about, he might give them a homeland in Norway somewhere or somewhere else. His idea of not, of just playing to the cultural right is absolutely, I have a theory here. Let me advance it to both of you. Whether he runs or not, he wants to own the hard right. He wants no one to his right. You're thinking, Eric.
I think that's probably true. I mean, George Will in his column, he had this great phrase, these vibrations of weirdness. And I think that pretty much summed up Mike Huckabee last week. And in a way, I think Mike Huckabee did us a favor. He held up a mirror to the right-wing media, and he showed us how crazy they have become. Large portions of it have been consumed by this Obama derangement syndrome. And he absolutely, as you say, wants to own that segment. It's a very profitable segment. It's a very loyal segment. He's out there selling books. He's trying to make headlines. And this is what you do. This is the conversation you have. You talk about how the president of the United States may not be loyal to this country.
What percentage, gentlemen, both of you, what percentage of the Republican Iowa caucus vote, which is what he's in love with because they're in love with him, what percentage of that vote that shows up next year in Iowa, early next year to vote in that caucus, will be comfortable, let me put it this way, with the birther mentality? Comfortable with people who are birthers? Half them?
I would say at least 50%.
Would you say that,
50%,
Eric?
if
what
not
percentage
more?
of those caucus goers are comfortable with, they don't believe in evolution, they don't believe in climate change, they don't believe in science, they believe the Earth's about 6,000 years old, and they believe this guy's not an American.
When you put it
all
that way,
fits together.
When you put it that way, Chris,
no, but they buy the whole blue plate special with regard to the right. What do you think, Eric? What percentage of the caucus attendees are comfortable with birtherism like Huckabee is?
They're embracing that whole right-wing media about Obama. 60, 70%. Look, if it's not, if it's not,
sorry, I shouldn't say that. No. Are you telling me that 60% of the caucus goers are on the far right on issues like evolution, science? The president's not really an American. The whole line of it.
Chris,
Eric.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably right, and they're embracing the whole Fox News talking points. And even if the birther stuff, they may be on the fence about their birth certificate, but the general notion that Obama is foreign and not like us, absolutely, strong majority.
You have about 40% of the Republican Party at large believing some element of birtherism, and the Iowa caucus.
I'll tell you who does. Here's somebody who does. George Will. George Will is literate. That's a big jump. Let's take a look. Here's George F. Will before Huckabee's latest tirade. Quote, sensible Americans must be detecting vibrations of weirdness emanating from people associated with the Republican Party. The most recent vibrator is Mike Huckabee. He should have replied to that talk show host, obscene paranoia, goodbye. Republicans should understand that when self-described conservatives, such as Maltzberg, that's the radio guy, voice question rants, and Republicans do not recoil from them, the Conservative Party is indirectly injured, as it is directly injured when Newt Gingrich speculates about Obama having a Kenyan anti-colonial mentality. Now, let's go back to this. It is Gingrich who polluted the mind of Mike Huckabee.
Which was polluted by...
They are sharing this. It's viral now on the right.
There is a transmission...
He said that's how you have a predictive model of the president's behavior, is to think of him as an anti-imperialist. He didn't say Mau, anti-imperialist Kenyan.
He said that is the best way to understand the president. There is a transmission belt of trash here on the right. It started with Forbes magazine putting this on a cover story last September. Newt Gingrich talked it up,
let me tell you
and then Mike Huckabee
what's good about America. Most Americans, by 80%, and I think it's a higher percent, have accepted the fact we have a president of a different ethnic background than perhaps their own. 80% of the American people pick people on the basis of their ability to do the job as president, as they did in November of 2008. That is the good news about America. 75% of Americans tell our pollsters they like Barack Obama personally.
Right.
That is what's driving these right-wingers into this crazy corner of 3 generations ago and what his grandfather thought about, because it's all they got. And that's the good news about America, that these people are so desperate they can't compete on issues or anything else.
But it plays to the paranoia and resentment and anger that does exist within, I don't know, 20, 30% of the population. And Mike Huckabee last week, he leapfrogged over Sarah Palin to be the head of that parade.
By the way, Sarah Palin's getting very nervous about Chris Christie because a rational guy who obviously is focused on the issues that matter to people like spending and economics is already making her last month's flavor of the month. Anyway, thank you, David Corn. Thank you, Eric Bollard.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.